Right. Greetings, fellow grade 10s. It's Mr. Chatwell again. Welcome to Back to Basics. Now what we are looking at today, basically, we are looking at trig functions, and we are examining a question paper of November 2016. Altogether. So we are trying an exam pass paper there and see in terms of what it got for us. Now, the first one is now 6.1. Basically, they say write down the value of A. So what is it that we are given? We are given that we have f of x, which is equals to A sine x, and the graph of g of x, which is equals to cos x plus 1, for x is an element of 0 degrees up until 360 degrees, right? Which means it starts at 0 degrees up until 360 degrees, right? Now, let's see in terms of what is it that you are going to do. Now, they say write down the value of A. What is going to be the value of A? The value of A, remember that it represents, the A here, it represents the amplitude, right? It represents the amplitude, and what can be understood as an amplitude is it is the highest, or the lowest point in our graph, right? And now if you can check in terms of what is going to be the highest point in this particular graph, you're going to realize that now the highest point in here that we are having, it is 2 in the graph of f, right? Now, look, in this graph of f, look, the highest point that you are having here, look, if you can have your line here, can you see that this graph of f, the highest point that is having is 2, and the lowest point is -2, right? So, which means that therefore, your A, the value of your A, it is going to be given by what? By 2, because remember I said amplitude is always written in positive, right? Even if, let's say, the graph was a graph of -2, right? But these are the value of A. When you represent your amplitude, you're going to say your A is equals to 2. How to get? Now let's look at 6.2. Now they say write down the period. The period of what? Of the graph of f. Now let's start here. Now remember, in our graph, when we calculate our period is calculating it by what? In a graph of sine, period, it is 360 degrees. Let's say divide by what? Divide by b. And what is that b? Now that b is basically a number next to the sine x here. Remember, this is a graph of A sine of what? Sine of x. So which means here it's same as sine of 1x. Are we together? Because there is nothing here, right? Let's say if this was a graph of A sine, let's say of 2x, the value of your b, it was going to be 2. But since there is nothing here, it is going to be 1, right? So which means the period here, it's going to be what? It's going to just 360 divided by 1, which is 360 degrees, right? But another way of just remembering or understanding a period, basically a period, it is the time interval in which the graph it takes to complete one full cycle. Now a full cycle, it's when the graph basically it moves starting from here and it finishes like this, right? Sometimes the full cycle, of course, it starts here, it passes here, and it goes back there, right? So that is going to be the full cycle. And the full cycle of our tan, remember our tan have an asymptote. It is basically when it in between two asymptote, when it starts like this and it moves like this, right? So these are two full cycles of the graph of sine, the graph of cos, and the graph of tan, right? So this one, for this graph to complete full cycle, look, it starts here, it moves up until here, right? So for it to complete full cycle again, indeed, it is what? It is 360 degrees. How to get? Hopefully this makes sense. Now let's look at, now they want us to determine what is the range of G. Now, if you were watching my videos, you'd realize that we said basically the range, it is what? It is all, possible. It is all possible what? It is all possible x, y values, right? How to get? So basically now, if you can look at this graph, right? Let me fix it very nicely here so that you can see. Now, if you can look at this graph of what? The graph of G, right? Now for the graph of G, now what will basically happen here, if you look at the graph of G, if you can start here for the values of y, you always start from the, at the bottom, you move upward. Basically, you check points where the graph is having, where the values of y, where the graph of g is touching, right? Now, basically at -2, there's no graph of g. At -1, there's no graph of g. But now, if you can look starting from 0, if you can plot this line, can you see that this particular thing, it touches the graph of what? Of g here, right? So which means it's going to start here at 0, and when you move upward, it goes and it also touches up until which particular point? Up until 2 altogether. So which means basically it starts, it is in between this, right? So which means the range of this particular graph is in between that, right? So which means you're going to say now, for you to represent the range, you're going to say, look, y is going to be the element of what? It is going to be the element of what? You can represent these with the what? With these square-like brackets, and the square-like bracket, it means it is also included. These points are also included, right? So the square-like bracket, it's more or less the same as lesser or equals, right? So, but basically it means the equal sign also, right? So it starts at 0 up until what? Up until 2 altogether. And remember, whenever you are looking for range, it starts from here. You start from below and then you move upward, right? Or you can write as y, it is the element of real numbers. Y is going to be in between what? It is in between or equals to what? Equals to 0 and what? And 2, right? Altogether, because remember the 0 is also included because it touches at this particular point altogether. So this is basically the range, right? Now let's look at your 6.4. Your 6.4, they say now, for which values of x, where x is in between 0 degrees and 360 degrees, will the graph of f of x multiplied by the g of x what? Greater than 0. Now look, now I know these questions, some of you really panic on this one, but look, basically when they say the graph of f of x multiplied by the graph of g of x are greater than 0, right? So basically any number, let's start this now, any number that can give you something that is greater than 0, right? Look, if let's say you multiply 1 and +1 and +1, the answer that you're going to get is still going to be positive. But if you multiply a negative number and a positive number, the number that you're going to get is going to what? Negative, right? So basically, we want the graph where the graph is either positive multiplied by what? Positive, where both of these graphs are positive, right? And we are saying where both of these graphs are positive, it's when they are going to be above the x-axis, not below the x-axis, but what? Above the x-axis, right? Where both of these graphs are positive and positive, or where both of these graphs are negative multiplied by negative, because negative multiplied by negative also gives you an answer that is greater than 0, right? So basically, we are going to come here and say now, where is our graph of f? Where it is greater than 0, and the graph of g, it is greater than 0, which means it's also upward, right? Now let's start with the graph of f. Now the graph of f, when you start here, you move. Can you see that this graph is upward only, right? So it's going to be that. So basically that's where the graph is going to be what? It is going to be upward. But now when it continues here, right? Can you see that this part, it's not going to apply, because this graph is not greater than 0 here. The graph of f of x is not greater than 0 here. So this part here is not going to apply. So it's only going to be up until here, the graph of f, right? Now, but if you look at the graph of g, can you see that also the graph of g, it is above what? Here. Can you see starting from here, it is above the what? It is above your positive. It is in the positive direction, right? Which means above your y-axis altogether. So which means now the graph where both of these graph, and it continues, because basically this graph, it also continues all this particular portion of the graph, it's above. But now where both of these graphs are positive or above your 0, it's going to be where? Now it's going to be where it starts here at 0 degrees and 108 degrees, because that's where basically both of these graphs are what? Are above your what? Are above your x-axis, right? Altogether. or rather are above your y-axis. And remember, when they say where f of x multiplied by g of x, they say where your y is greater than 0, and where your y are greater than 0, it's going to range between where now? It's going to be where x is the element of real numbers, or it's going to be basically where x is in between what? 0 degrees. It's going to be where x is between 0 degrees and 180 degrees. And why are we saying so? Because now look, 0 degrees here, it's going to be 0 degrees because when you start here, the graph here, when you start your graph here, and when you move here, it is above, and when you start here, your graph, and you move here, it is above. But this one, when it moves this portion, it becomes below, then it doesn't apply, right? So basically, it's going to be where the graph is in between 0 degrees and 180 degrees. Are we okay? Now that is going to be that. Then you get your marks. Now this one, they say now the graph of G is reflected above about the x-axis and then shifted 2 units upward to obtain the graph of h of x. Now, what is it that you're going to do? Now, let's start here. Whenever they talk of reflection, right? When they say about the x-axis, it means your y change. Let me just fix that. Let me just write this very nicely. Right, let's get a nice color there. Now, when they say every time when they say it is reflected about the x-axis, which means what changes? Your y becomes what? Becomes negative. Okay, the y becomes negative, and now they say it is also what? Shifted 2 units upward, which means basically the graph of what? The graph of h of x. The graph of h of x is going to be equal to what? Now, I said when it's reflected about the x-axis, your y becomes negative. So the graph of x is going to be negative into what is the other one? The graph of g of x that we are having. The graph of g of x, isn't it that it's cos of x? It's cos of x plus 1, isn't it so? Then, but now they are saying you are shifting how many units? 2 units upward, which means it's going to be plus also 2. Okay. It is also going to be plus 2, isn't it so? And when you are having that, what is it that you are going to have basically now from there? So what is going to be applicable here? Let's start here. So we are going to multiply with this negative throughout here, right? So which means the graph of h of x is going to be because what? You are going to multiply the negative here, right? Now, when you multiply the negative here, what is it that you're going to have? This is going to be negative cos x, minus negative cos x minus 1 plus 2. Isn't it so? Right? And because remember, you multiplied with the negative in this particular bracket. And when you multiplied with the negative into this particular bracket, this is what you're going to have, right? Okay. Then when you are writing this, this is going to be same as what now? Negative cos x minus 1 plus 2 basically will give you what? It will give you plus 1, right? So which means the graph of cos fx of the new graph is going to be negative cos x, what? Cos x and then plus 1. Okay. Then that is going to be the new function. Altogether, then you get your 2 marks. Are we together, good people? Hopefully this makes sense to you. And I think I'll stop here for now. Thank you very much for tuning in.